your patience because the session ran a little bit long. The previous one, we just wanted to give a break to the interpreters. I hope that's fine with you. So what we're going to do over the course of the following session, if you looked at the title, you've seen that the scope originally intended for this session was extremely broad. It was looking at global tendencies and the Turkish market. In fact, what I would suggest for this afternoon is to take a slightly narrower scope on this issue. And in fact, to give you the European perspective on the Turkish market. Just to introduce myself very quickly, I'm Pierre Tardieu. I work for the European Wind Energy Association. And I'm the person in charge of the relations with member states, and I'm also following some trade policy. Back in 2009, actually the EWEA board identified 5 key emerging markets in Europe, among which Turkey was one of the most prominent markets. A couple of years later now, in 2012, I think is a good moment to take stock of the progress that's been made. With me, I have 3 distinguished speakers, and they will be approaching this from 3 different angles. We have one top turbine manufacturer, one national association from not from an emerging market this time, but from a quite established and mature market, which is Spain, and a project developer. So without further ado, I'd like to give the word to Lars Krogsgaard. He's got a very extensive experience in the wind sector, starting in 2002, where he was vice president of renewables at Dong. He then moved on to become CEO of the EMEA region at Siemens Wind Power, and now he's the CCO at Nordex. And they have a huge interest and a huge stake in the Turkish markets, and I very much look forward to his remarks. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pierre, and ladies and gentlemen, dear business partners and dear customers, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. My task is to talk about Turkey from a manufacturer's perspective. I'd like to give you a short background about Nordex, what we do here, give you our view on the Turkish market, how we see it developing, and then take a little time to look at some challenges that we consider particularly relevant for Turkey, as well as some opportunities in the marketplace. About Nordex, we are an old company in wind terms, 27 years of experience. We were founded originally in Denmark, but then moved to Germany. We are headquartered now in Hamburg. We have active sales activities across the globe, but we have our main focus on 20 countries on 3 continents. We are currently about 2,500 employees. We're not the biggest guys in the group, but we have a pretty sizable operation with now more than 5,000 turbines installed across the world. We offer products across all wind classes, so in low, mid, and high wind projects. We're listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange in Germany. And the way we try to profile ourselves and position ourselves in the market is that we try to be a quality supplier that matches the quality of the absolute best products in the industry, of course, but a particularly flexible one with whom it's easy for customers to discuss. We meet our customers at eye level with small and competent teams that are empowered to make decisions, and we are very fast internally to get things through our systems so that we don't tire out our customers. We call it big enough to deliver and small enough to care at Nordex. That's how we see ourselves. Our position in Turkey. We were one of the early movers in the Turkish wind market, building our first project back in 2006, 2007. In 2009, we made the move to establish our own subsidiary here, and we have now quite a sizable operation with just under 100 employees. We have more than 200 turbines installed, and we have a fairly large part of the total Turkish wind capacity installed as Nordics turbines. We're very proud about that, and what we're even more proud about is that we have more projects coming along. We have a number of deals in execution currently. I think it's worthwhile to mention in that context that it's not only the direct staff that we have here in Turkey that is creating value for your country. It's also the significant, sizable landscape of sub-suppliers and business partners that we work with. And we have developed our business so much that we now consider ourselves, in all modesty, as being the market leader in the Turkish market. This is the landscape of projects that we have built or are building, and as you can see, there's a clear concentration, not surprisingly, towards the western part of the country. Now, looking at Turkey from my perspective, and the way in which we expect the market to develop. And you have to understand that I am in the best sense, a traveling salesman. I travel across the globe, see markets, talk to customers in a number of different places, and the observations that I'm making here is not as an expert on Turkey, but more kind of general observation from the perspective of somebody who is working at the global level. So what is characteristic of the Turkish market seen from my perspective? I mean, firstly, you do not have the sense of austerity that you have in many of the other, particularly southern European markets. There's still a sense of optimism here. There's still a sense of it being possible to do things. You have growth in your electricity demand. That's not something you see everywhere anymore. You have, importantly, wind. Also important if you want to develop wind capacity in your market. And you have the level of political support that we consider important for the development, not only of wind, but for renewables. Also what we're seeing generally speaking, I would say, a supportive local financial community. There's interest in financing these projects. Of course, foreign banks are also involved, but there generally is interest, and you have good project sizes. Also important, you have a decent flow through of reasonably scaled projects, which is also important if you want to build capacity. So we remain fairly bullish about the Turkish market. Whether we are as bullish as your government, maybe another thing, but we do see quite a significant growth potential in Turkey, and we see annual growth rates, realistic annual growth rates in the 12 to 16% range. But there are serious challenges out there, and I would like to go through a set of those, and I've just selected a little more than a handful, which I consider, again, not as an expert on Turkey, but as somebody who works broadly with wind energy, that I consider particularly important. A theme that constantly pops up when we are talking to customers in Turkey is the long and somewhat unpredictable process towards getting permits and licenses in place. We saw this in the, I guess, somewhat extreme case back in 2007, when suddenly I think more than 70 gigawatts of applications suddenly landed on a desk somewhere, and it took the better part of 3 years to work through that pile to get things sorted out. It caused a tremendous amount of frustration along the road, I think it's fair to say. Also, I keep hearing from customers that whilst there have been improvements in the permitting process, the process towards getting all the proper things in place is still lengthy. And one of the things that I'm wondering about, again, comparing to other markets, is whether whether the process can be streamlined further, whether you can consolidate permitting activities with particular authorities so that you don't have to wander around and take the very long road towards getting everything into place. It is, of course, generally positive that there's motion in the process around licenses for Turkish wind farms. But I have to say that at Nordics we consider the auction process under which applicants bid a contribution fee per kilowatt hour to be paid over 20 years to TWEC, we consider that problematic. We are genuinely, and I know that's a concern that is shared by many of you, we are genuinely concerned that some customers may not have had the full overview of the feasibility of their projects before they bid for capacity, and that many license bids have been at too high levels. Now, it's of course, I guess from a government perspective, positive in the first place that bids were high, because it signals interest in the market and it signals interest when it comes to developing capacity. But I believe that the real measure of success for the Turkish wind industry should not be the level that these bids landed at, but rather the extent to which projects are ultimately built. And I think the system that was set in place here will actually cause some projects not to be built, and eventually, I guess these projects will then go back into the pool and possibly pop up at lower prices later or under a new scheme. But I think it may cause Turkey to lose some speed in the process towards the ambitious target for 2020. I'm not, of course, an advisor to the Turkish government. However, if somebody was to ask me how an alternative approach could look like, then I think I would reconsider the scheme and consider some other paths. Another issue that pops up are grid constraints. There may be a license, there may be a wind turbine, there may be financing. It's all good, but it's also not really important if there's no grid connection. It's my understanding that TWEC has so far confirmed grid capacity of around 12 or 13 gigawatt for wind energy. And assuming that Turkey seriously wants to meet its target for 2020, then you will need to add significant capacity to the grid over the coming years. Now that may be possible from an overall perspective, but things do get complicated when you get down to the individual substation level. And I understand that in Turkey you have a limit on per substation of around of 5% on wind energy in the sense that only 5% on that substation can come from wind energy. That is lower than in other markets, and I believe that potentially this is something that Turkey could reconsider if they wanted to improve the system. And then there's the level and duration of the support scheme that you have. The new Turkish feed-in tariff has a bandwidth somewhere between a little over, I think, on current exchange rate of a little over 5 to a little under 8.5 euro cent, dependent on the extent to which components are manufactured locally. Now, even under the maximum tariff, the feed-in tariff level is very low. And when I compare to other European markets, I believe that there's only one or two markets with feed-in tariff systems that land at lower levels. And I guess that is one reason why many, if not all, projects so far built under the new scheme have opted for market pricing rather than the the tariff. Now, to me, the Turkish ambition to develop 20 gigawatts of capacity by 2020 appears ambitious on that background, not least if you look at financing, and I'll come back a little bit to that, because I believe that generally you'll see more scarcity on financing going forward, and I believe also that in a real marketplace, financing will tend to wander towards those projects somewhere else in Europe, potentially, that yield the most robust returns. Now, you shouldn't misunderstand me. We're not, as manufacturers, running away from the obligation that we have towards getting wind turbine prices down to a level where we can achieve grid parity, so compete with other technologies on an equal cost base. That's not the case. At Nordics, we are very strong believers that turbine pricing or production efficiency on the turbines must come up so that the cost of energy is lowered to a level that matches what you generally see in the market. And we actually believe that we're only one or two project generations away from that in the high and mid-wind classes. A little further down the road, you'll see class 3. Also, allow me to point out that the feed-in tariff expires in 2015. There's not a long time to the 31st of December 2015, and it is certainly a very, very short time for those manufacturers who are being proposed to go and build local manufacturing facilities in Turkey. I believe that this is something that the Turkish government will need to look at. Also, in that context, perhaps a word on our position on local manufacturing in general. Now, it's no secret that times are not easy in the wind industry for those of us who are on this side of the fence. These are tough times, very, very competitive markets, customers that are very aware of pricing. And I think one thing I can say is that if there is a thing that we will be careful about, it would be to make capacity investments that will trigger fixed costs for the future unless we are absolutely certain that carries. And I would have to say that right now, and certainly with the kind of volume that we're seeing this year in Turkey, which I guess is until now installation terms around 500 megawatt, I consider it very doubtful that there will be serious broad initiatives by manufacturers when it comes to establishing capacity here in Turkey. Now, it may be a different matter if we saw a robust and consistent 1 gigawatt market. I think there may be other manufacturers who would also have a different view on it. But I would have to say that now it's a tough case, also against the background of the tariff that runs out and the uncertainty that inevitably hangs together with that. And then there's currency. Wind farm procurement in euro, revenue streams in US dollar, contribution fees to TWEC, to my knowledge, in Turkish lira. This is the somewhat complex reality that faces our customers. It was an unpleasant surprise, at least to those of us who are not Chinese, to learn that the new tariff was in US dollars rather than euro. The dollar nomination is problematic for manufacturers based in the Eurozone for obvious reason. And in that context, I would like to make the comment that a very large majority of the turbines that have so far been installed in Turkey were machines that came from Eurozone-based suppliers, not Chinese, and certainly not American-manufactured machines. I'm not privy to the political motivation that lies behind that decision to nominate in US dollars rather than euro, and I don't want to speculate about the motivations of the Turkish government, but it does put the turbine manufacturers that have a base like we do in the Eurozone at a disadvantage compared to other suppliers that have a very minimal role in your country. And moreover, it adds cost for those of you, dear customers, who will have ultimately to carry hedging, currency exchange costs. And it also adds unnecessary complexity, I believe, to the whole system. And again, this is something that may drag down speed a little bit and be counterproductive when it comes to the development that Turkey actually wants to further. Then there's a separate dimension on the local content option in the new tariff. I've already said it, I believe that financing, or we generally believe that financing will be a major challenge for wind farm projects going forward. At Nordics, we believe in compounded annual growth rates in the 5 to 6% range at global level in wind energy. But we also see at the same time that whilst the curve may be going up in terms of installations or projections may be going up, we believe that the absolute capital available for project financing in the renewables area will go down. And when I ask our finance and treasury functions how much they believe that will be, they say that it's somewhere over the next 5-6 years, that somewhere over the next 5-6 years you'll see a drop in the 10 to 15% range. Now, that delta somehow needs to be dealt with. Banks are becoming much more careful about their lending, to some extent driven by the capital adequacy requirements that you have under the Basel 1, 2, 3 things right now. But they're also generally being much more careful about assessing projects. We're seeing more and more banks coming in to take deals that were in the past perhaps handled by 1 or 2 banks. And the whole syndication thing takes time, it takes effort, and it costs a lot of money. And as project financing becomes increasingly scarce, there's one thing that will become increasingly important, and that is access to good export credit, the good export credit arrangements that, for example, you get in Germany under Hermes or in Denmark under the Export Credit Foundation. And there you will have the issue that with an increase in local content in Turkey, you will have some of these opportunities disappearing because products cannot be nominated anymore from those organizations' perspectives as, say, German or Danish. And I believe that this schism is something that will be a very practical matter that somehow you will need to deal with it. I don't have an easy fix for the issue, but there is something that should be dealt with here. Now, it's not all challenges. There's, of course, also lots of opportunities for Turkey. Now, I'm a very proud citizen of Denmark, which now has somewhere between 25 and 30% of its total electricity consumption covered by wind energy. It's the political target that 50% of Denmark's electricity shall come from wind energy by 2020, and I believe that will happen. I live in Germany. Germany has more than, I think, almost 25,000 wind turbines installed now. They generate around 10% of the total electricity of Germany. The potential is enormous. It can be done. And you are in the extremely fortunate situation that you have wind resource and you have land. Not many markets have that. I think the benefits or the opportunities for Turkey are really big there. And at Nordics, we see a technical wind energy potential, not in the 50% or the 50 gigawatt range that I saw advertised out here, but we actually see it considerably larger, somewhere between the 70 to 100 gigawatt, perhaps also coming a little bit from the background of being a manufacturer that is very strong in producing or manufacturing low wind turbines that make projects that were hitherto difficult coming into the money. The 600 or so megawatt that we have installed have created hundreds of millions of local value creation that I hope benefits Turkey, or is seen to benefit Turkey. And then you have another thing which I consider really interesting. Somebody told me that Turkey has 15% of Europe's hydropower potential, and that there's a realistic potential in hydropower of around 35-40 gigawatts, something in that range. Now that's a big advantage when it comes to wind energy, or could be leveraged as a big advantage when it comes to wind energy. There is a beautiful marriage between stable hydropower, particularly of course reservoir hydropower, and the inherently feeble wind energy. If you can combine those things, and I understand that there's also privatization processes going along on the hydropower side, then I believe that there's a really interesting business model there for investors who hold both assets. I understand also that you can actually balance at the national level here in Turkey, so that you can really generate benefits from having both kinds of assets in your portfolio. Bridgehead to the MENA region. I travel a lot, as I mentioned, and I see Turkish investors in many markets. There is, of course, opportunities, particularly, I guess, in markets where you have a cultural or language advantage, but it's also clear that you meet Turkish investors in many parts of the Middle East and in the Arab customers. We see considerable long-term potential in some of these markets, and one recommendation I would make, to the extent that that's not happening, is that Turkish investors should try to leverage the advantage, the contacts that they have, and drive development in some of those markets, which in wind terms are still in their very infancy. Another thing we believe about, or we like about Turkey, is that I was complaining before about the lengthy permitting process. On the other hand, I have to say that one of the things that you can do in Turkey, and where the authorities play along in, I believe, the most positive ways, is that it's relatively easy to re-permit projects on new turbines, certainly compared to some of the other markets. Now, there are other, particularly southern European markets, where you have permitting processes that I'm not going to name a country here, but I can give you an example. We are just building a project which has been underway for 16 years in a southern European market. And on that project, we considered the possibility, or rather our customer considered the possibility of changing the spec of the turbine, because there was new technology that was simply better. But we, or rather the customer, decided that did not make sense, because that would simply delay things even further. I believe that Turkey is a market where you can actually much faster introduce things, and we consider that also important in terms of the projects that we like to do here. And then, of course, there are the employment perspective. I already spoke a little bit about that in the context of industrial and skills development. There's a lot happening. There's jobs being created with us, but also with a large range of sub-suppliers. That's a little bit of input from my side. I hope it gave you a little bit of perspective on the activities that are taking place here. We are certainly committed to the market. Do we believe that there are challenges? Yes, clearly. But we also believe that there's a good future and a lot of potential for wind energy in the future in Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that enlightening presentation. And we're going to move right on to Heikki Wielstedt. We mentioned Germany and Denmark, but I'd like to, now introduce to the other powerhouse of the wind sector in Europe, Spain. Heikki Willstedt is the Energy Policies Director at the Spanish Wind Power Association. He's also been Energy and Climate Change Coordinator at WWF, and also has some experience working with the UN Environments Program. And as I mentioned, obviously Spain is one of the powerhouses of wind in Europe. It wasn't so long ago that Spain had...
because being here today is a good occasion to exchange views from two countries that are quite similar in many ways. That's why I said it's a pleasure to be in Turkey, because as a Mediterranean country, we share many things, also many cultural values. So, of course, I am a big admirer of Turkish culture. And the question is, when we look at where Turkey is now, and we look at where Spain was at the end of the 90s in terms of wind power, you can see the similarities, and you can also see the challenge that was ahead, in this case of Spain, but in your case, in the case of Turkey, the challenge that is ahead for 2023. But first of all, let me introduce just briefly who is our association. We represent more than 200 companies that range from developers to manufacturers to service providers. And these companies have grown from quite small size, very at national level, to international size. So, and of course we have certain companies that probably you know, like we have Iberdrola or Gamesa, which are global players in the wind power sector. But it's not only about these big companies, it's about all the small companies that make the Spanish wind power sector, that the effort of all these people, all these companies have made possible the success story of wind power in Spain. Our goal as an association, of course, is to promote the establishment of wind power in the Spanish market, in the electrical market, but it is also to help the society understand the good parts and the more difficult parts of wind power, to establish a link and a communication channel with society, not just with government, to talk about renewable energies and specifically about wind power. Therefore, we have a lot of communication activities, and also we have working groups where we get together with the people from the companies, but also people from outside the sector, and discuss all issues that are relevant for the sector. But let me just tell you a little bit about the Spanish wind power sector. As you can see, Spain was an early mover, of course not as early as Germany or Denmark and Germany, but if you look at the European market, it was probably the third mover in time. We started with, we must say, we copied the system that was already in place in Denmark and in Germany, the feed-in tariff system, and with a Spanish flavor, of course. And this has worked well for the last, since 1998, so it's 14 years. But we had almost from the beginning, a very important differentiating factor, which is we had the main utilities, power companies, starting to build wind farms quite early on, like in 2002 and 2003. Especially one company, Iberdrola, made the market for Spain change from less than 1,000 megawatts installed per year at that time it was about 500, 600 megawatts per year, to go over the 1,000 megawatt per year market. And this is more or less the magical threshold that was mentioned here. Once you have over 1,000 megawatt installed per year, you can expect industry to be interested to invest in factories in that market. And that's exactly what happened in Spain. You had this magical threshold achieved, and then the market started to grow at over 1,000 megawatts per year, and achieved almost 2,000 megawatts per year by 2008. There is a similarity with the Turkish situation, because wind power was deployed at the same time when electricity demand was growing and growing very fast. It was growing at an average of 4 to 5% per year, so there was a huge demand for additional capacity. The problem is that at the same time that wind power was being installed, gas power stations were also being installed, and now we have a problem because we don't have that much electricity demand, so gas power stations are not functioning, and they're not very happy about that. But that's another question. So we have an industry that invests like 8% of its revenue in research and development, and this is necessary because industry wants to keep competitive in the international market. So it's very important to invest in being competitive. And then the last, but not least, it has been mentioned here, you need to have capital. You need to have money. Money and the availability and the cost of money is the single most important factor. Because if you don't have a banking system that puts the capital to build the farms, then you can have very ambitious goals, you can have very nice feed-in tariffs, but if there is no money, there is no action. And how do you get action? Well, you have to convince investors that you're a serious country. We managed to do that in the 90s. We wouldn't manage to do it now. Nobody wants to invest in the Spanish wind power sector at the moment, but that's another question. And it's not the fault of the sector. So you have to convince investors, analysts, that wind power is a safe bet. And for that, the easiest way is to put a feed-in tariff and stick with it as long as it makes sense, at the beginning at least. When you are under, let's say, 10,000 megawatts of wind power, feed-in tariffs make sense. After 10,000 megawatts, it starts to be a little bit too, let's say, too costly. You have to think about other solutions. But as I said, you need to have money. And when you establish a very, very ambitious objective like the Turkish one, you have to be aware that you need a lot of money to achieve that. 20,000 megawatts means 25,000 to 30,000 million euros that you have to get from banks or from other financial institutions. And you have to get it at a cheap price. If you have to pay 15% for that money, then it's no point. Well, if there is a point, if you have a feed-in tariff that is huge, I mean, it's very high, then maybe the banks will lend you the money. But if you have a low feed-in tariff, they will not lend you the money. So the question in the end is you have to have the right vision, you have to have the right policies, and you have to have the right banking system. So the current situation in Spain is not bad in terms of what has been achieved, as I said. We are the second country in terms of installed power, the second in terms of wind power generated. So 1 year, in 2010 we were the first one, and probably this year we are going to be again the first one ahead of Germany, because the wind patterns over the Atlantic have been varying lately. So, but that's another question. So we are the third country in the world in wind power penetration, 16%, after Denmark and Portugal probably. And as Spanish companies have 10 gigawatts of installed power outside Spain. So they have not only invested locally, internally, they have become international players. Of course, this takes us to the challenges ahead. We are supposed to reach 35,000 megawatts by 2020, plus 750 offshore, but probably we're not going to get there because of the capital problem, the crisis. We don't get. The government doesn't want to move the renewable sector too much at the moment, so investments are not going to be forthcoming in the next few years, but probably after that. We have had a big challenge is the integration of all this wind power into the grid. This costs money, it's not cheap. You have to make all the wind farms intelligent and connect them to the grid operator, whether you have one or you have several, but you have to do that. And in the Spanish case, it has helped that it was power companies that were investing in wind power because they have the knowledge. They have people that are specialized in grid integration issues, so it was relatively easy to connect the farms to the grid because there was specialized people in the companies talking with the people of the grid operator, and so it was a smooth evolving over more than 5-6 years of slowly integrating all wind farms into the grid in real time. And of course, one of the big challenges for Spanish companies is internationalization, which is one of the reasons I'm here, because I believe that when a country has an objective, ambitious objective like Turkey, then it's a natural market also for Spanish companies. As you can see, the development of wind power in Spain has been quite gradual, from a couple of thousand of megawatts at the end of the last century, so to say, or last decade, to almost 22,000 at the moment, 22,000 megawatts installed power. So as I've been saying, and I think I'm repeating what the previous speaker was saying, our experience shows that if you are determined and you have the right ingredients, you can achieve this ambitious goal of 20,000 megawatts. But you have to go through all the challenges that this means, and you have to put in place the necessary policies to make it possible. We have, as a technology, we have grown from being the little kid that was very nice to play with for other technologies. Oh, look at the nice wind power. We have a little bit of wind power in our system. Now we are the third technology in a country the size of almost 47 million people. We are providing this year 17% of the electricity, almost 47 gigawatts of electricity. We are not anymore, and we don't want to be considered the nice renewable kid. We are part of the system. We are mainstream technology, and we have to be considered like that. We have the same responsibilities as other technologies, but we have certain good things that other technologies don't have. Like we are local, we are clean, and also we create more jobs than conventional thermal energies. If you think about what can be achieved by wind energy, just look at this graph. This was the case of recently, I think it was a week ago, at the beginning of November. you have at a certain point 64% of the electricity that the whole country was demanding was produced by wind power, outshining other technologies like CCGT, which is gas, or nuclear, or hydro. Of course, I can show you also the graph where we are just providing 1% of the energy. So that's why one of the challenges of wind power is to integrate itself with other technologies. It was mentioned here. With hydro, you can integrate pretty well because of the response time. And you can also integrate with fast gas power stations. It's not a problem. It's a matter whether you can imagine that the system can function in different ways. If you want to keep the system functioning the old ways all the time, then it's better not to go for wind power because it demands some adjustments. So, in Spain, as I said, it was very important to work with the grid operator, which is Red Eléctrica, it's the TSO, and the establishment of office where the TSO can, in real time, see how much energy is being produced in each of the wind farms, or there are almost 1,000 wind farms in Spain. So you can see it in real time, and if there is a problem with the system, you can just tell whatever wind farm is in the place where it needs to be shut off, that it has to stop injecting energy to the grid. So what does it mean? It means that wind power has become more adjustable to the grid in the sense that it cannot increase its production, but it can decrease its production in real time if it is necessary. So it's not anymore completely unmanageable energy. You can manage it pretty well. And if you are doing the right predictions, you don't need much backup. This is a big issue because we have been accused that for each megawatt of wind power that is installed, you need 1 megawatt of backup from a conventional thermal plant. And in the case of Spain, we only need, and this is what the TSO has said, we have 22,000 megawatts of wind power, and we only need normally 800 megawatts of backup. That's a huge difference between 1 and 1. And that's because we have a good prediction system which gives us the possibility to say in 24 hours in advance with less than 10% of margin, error margin, how much wind energy is going to be in the system. So there is no need for huge backup if you know how much is going to be there. This is how it works. You have in colors the different places where in the country where there are wind farms. And at the end of the day, this is from 2010, you have a deviation 24 hours in advance of 13% compound. But these days, in 2012, we have less than 10%. Well, I'm not going to extend myself too much on the technical issues. It's just a question of advice that work well with the grid operators. It is a good idea so that you get to know each other well, and you get to work out how to integrate more and more wind power into the system. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the local content issue. As I said, in Spain, the local content issue was quite important in the end of the 90s and beginning of last decade. But it was, to a certain extent, solved by the fact that the market grew. So when we, as I said, we overstepped the 1,000 megawatt threshold, it was not necessary anymore to have local content requirements. The manufacturers were coming by themselves in most cases. And in other cases, there was a local industry that was ready to manufacture the components that were necessary for the wind farms. So in these 15 years of development of the industry, we have developed the whole chain of industrial production. So we have manufacturers of key components, the manufacturers of wind farms, service providers, and so on and so on. You can see where the manufacturing facilities are. I must say that it is inevitable that at some point you will probably end up with overcapacity in the manufacturing sector, because the expectations probably of continuing having a market of 2,000 megawatts per year attract more and more investments in industrial facilities, but in the end you have to be realistic, and in the Spanish case there was a little bit of too much optimism of how much the country could invest in wind power in such a short term. So we have in the last 2-3 years been closing some manufacturing facilities, which is always very is not nice, but you will have to face that, because if you are investing too much in capacity building, then at some point the market will probably not need all that manufacturing capacity. And there have been a lot of investments in manufacturing capacity in other countries, especially in the Asian ones. So competition has started to be fierce also in international markets. So if we look at the contribution to the GDP of the sector, you can see here that starting from 1,200 million euros of GDP, the sector has grown to almost 3,000 euros of GDP by 2008, a little less in 2009. But it has normally been, the promoters have been the leading ones in terms of creating value or investment, and the manufacturer of wind turbines were following suit, starting from a little bit to 220 million euros of production to over 500 million euros of production in 2009. In 2008, we had over 600 million. But you have to have the right market, and you have to have the right industrial capacity in order to build up this economic sector in a very short time. In order to do that, you definitely want to, or you need to have a legal framework that is stable. If you do the same mistake as we have been experiencing in Spain, that in the last 2 or 3 years we have had more than 6 changes in the law, in the regulations that affect wind power installations, then you will end up with investors having no confidence in the market. And that's very, you should try to avoid that, because when you are starting, it's very important to build up that confidence. So we had 2 types of systems for revenue. One is the regulated tariff or feed-in tariff, which was one of the lowest in Europe. And then we had something that was quite specific for Spain. I think that Denmark also had something similar. That is a market price plus a premium. So the wind farms would get the market price plus a premium, which is about 3.5 euro cents per kilowatt hour, or 35 cents euros per megawatt hour. And also there was a cap on the floor established. A floor is nice to have, because then it's easy to go to the bank and explain that you are going to get at least a certain amount of money for each megawatt hour you are going to sell. So you are exposed under the second option, you are exposed to the market, but at the same time you have a certain floor under which you don't fall. So the bank knows that you are going to get at least that revenue. So it's easier to convince them to lend you the money. As I said, Spain had one of the lowest feed-in tariffs. Now we don't have a feed-in tariff. We have a moratorium for the next couple of years at least. And if you put it on the balance, just to finish, if you compare what has been for 3 years between 2007 and 2009, how much has been paid by consumers in terms of premiums, 3,700 million euros, sorry, and you compare with all the things that it has meant for the Spanish economy, GDP, direct GDP is more than 6,000 million, indirect GDP is 4,000 million, all these important economical things, then you realize that it's been a very good investment for the country. So the policy was right, the achievement was good, and but now we are struggling to convince the government on how to go ahead with this sector. You are not in that situation, of course. You are starting, so, but it's good to reflect on how you want to achieve the goals and how to get there with as little problems as possible. So, just a few conclusions. I'm not going to repeat the reasons why the Spanish wind sector has become a world player. It was said already. I repeat that the Turkish objective is achievable, but as I said, there are important challenges ahead. Local content requirements should really be carefully analyzed in order not to become an important barrier for entrance of competitive companies into the Turkish wind power market. Because in the end, the ultimate objective of wind power technology is to produce cheap electricity. The jobs will come afterwards, as was shown in the Spanish case. But to create jobs just is not really the objective of wind power technology, as it is not the objective of any other electricity generating technology. The question is, we want to generate cheap energy, electricity. And by having some local content requirements, I'm not sure that is going to be the case. It might become more expensive. So it's a self-defeating objective. So to end up, for the Spanish companies, as I said, which are in the international arena, the Turkish market is very interesting, and they look forward to possibly cooperate or enter this market in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hiki, for that sobering assessment and this advice going forward. We will now give the floor to Gurkan Sarli, who's working as a development project manager at RES Anatolia, which is a subsidiary of RES, and he also has prior experience with the Acteum Group, and he will be discussing his perspective on the Turkish market. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pierre, and I would like to thank you all. For the rest of my presentation, I would like to continue with my native language. Özellikle TÜREB'e ve bizi buraya davet ettiğinden beri.
I would like to thank to TÜREB and to the organizers for giving us this opportunity to talk in front of you. The subject of my presentation will be about wind farm development in Turkey, and there are 4 topics to cover in my presentation. One of them is introduction of our company. I will give certain information about our operations in Turkey. I will not go very deeply into detail in terms of statistics, but just I will be talking about some problems in the development phases in the market, and some solution recommendations will be added to my presentation. Our group has been working for more than 30 years in renewable energy sector. Our operations are in Europe, North America, and Asia Pacific. Our basic objective is to help sustainable development and create certain projects for that sense and contribute to the sustainable future. And in the global renewable energy market, we do play a central role in the development of these markets, and we would like to be a directive institution. And also our company as an independent electric generator, we do have certain transformers and plants in our portfolio, so we do generate our own electricity. You can see we do many offices in the worldwide, and we do have more than 20,000 employees. Our company has operated more than 60 gigawatt of wind energy capacity up to this day. In our portfolio, we do have thousands of gigawatt projects. They are on the phase of to be developed. As I said before, we are working in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific in the worldwide. We are very active in these points. In addition to this, offshore wind is also a part of our activity, especially in the UK, Ireland, France. These are the main areas that we are engaged in. We do have approximately 800 megawatt wind farm, and also the other renewables, such as biomass and solar, are the possibilities for us to be developed. In 2009, we were established as Press Anatolia. We created certain projects. One of these projects, 50 megawatts. Totally, we received 170 megawatts, and we have added a new project which has a capacity of 48 megawatt. As of today, we do have 13 staff in our company, and we are dedicated to development, engineering, construction, and operation of the wind and solar power plants in Turkey. Of course, within the respect of our objectives, our company is going to be one of the most important players in the future, and in that sense, we would like to develop ourselves about 50 to 100 megawatt per year. Now, if I want to talk about the current status of wind farms, I actually want to give some general information. This information belongs to year 2011. This year information will be published in the near future. When we look at the electricity general distribution as of 2011, we can see it is very important in terms of portions. Other than this, other speakers have mentioned, we do have 20,000 megawatts 2023 target, and there are certain projects for this aim. Until today, there are certain plants, and they are approximately 19,000 megawatts, and there are other 10,000 or 11,000 megawatts which are going to be licensed, but totally we have 7,000 or 8,000 kilowatts to be working on. If we talk about this in general, we need to take new capacities into the operation, and I can say that our path is not an easy path. Our company in that point is active in the market, and it has developed its activities. For that reason, there are certain challenges in the process, so I would like to talk a little bit about those challenges. While we are working in order to develop the processes, we do have certain challenges, and one of them is that the licensing process. The license process is that you are establishing a project company and you are preparing your documents, you define and determine your area, and you apply for a license to the EMRA, and EMRA has certain technical analysis and evaluations for this. EMRA directs you to the Renewable Energy Directorate after certain evaluations and documentations. If your project application is approved, you are entering into a procurement process. If you are approved as applier, EMRA has announced a decree that you are eligible. After this decree, there are certain requirements and obligations that you have to make. You have to change your main agreement, foundation agreement, and investment ratio should be taken up to 20%. And other than this, EMRA issues some LOCs, and at this time, TEAS agreed tender agreement is the other phase. Then you can get the generation license process. But after this, the real challenge starts, because right now you have all the feasibility investment program, you have license for generation, but in this license, when you come to development process with the permits that you have got in your hand, first of all you have to start with MIGAM. There is a step for MIGAM, which is the General Directorate of Mine Works. You have to reserve all your registers with regards to mines, and you have to eliminate certain places for new mining areas. If there are certain areas in the mining process, you have to interview with various markets and make your market and area eligible for your own works. The thing that you are having some difficulty is your project is not facing an evaluation process. In this phase, there is a stage of mining processes, and because of this busy process, you may lose your area or you may use your potential. After this point, there are certain analysis on radar and communication interaction. Actually, my point is to bring you to the last point, but while I'm trying to bring you to the last point, there are certain risks. I want to show you the risks. With regards to your turbine, you may have not settled your layout. Actually, you do not know the next step about your project. You are making an analysis about your project, and to be the Turkish Scientific Institution gets the analysis and it sends this analysis to Ministry of Energy, and the ministry gets into connection with you, and then there are certain, as I said before, interaction effects, and within this frame it takes approximately 4 to 6 months to develop your projects in this process schedule. And in the next step, yes, you have completed all of these phases and you have to estimate your project trend. And there are certain steps. One of them is this land rights, because there are certain private lands, ownership rights. You may rent or lend these places, and you may expropriate these areas. For expropriation, the time duration is about 2 to 3 years. But with fast or emergent expropriation announcements, your work can be drawn in an earlier phase. However, until now, there have been certain projects they were developed. They were thought to be advantageous because they were subjected to be expropriation. However, there were some delays. One of them, we can see that there is a good example for this. The land which is going to be expropriated is subject to be the approval of Prime Minister. I would like to give an example to you that In our projects, we would like to go to measurement. We have applied for measurement. Unfortunately, our measurement line was not approved or has not been approved until now. For that reason, there could be certain negative effects for your project's process. There is another process, which is a zoning process. You may solve this problem via two channels. You can go to province directorate or directly to the ministry. You can manage this kind of process. Of course, when you developed your project with regards to zoning, actually we may say that there have not been major challenges in terms of zoning. Approximately within 5 or 6 months, you can manage all zoning phases. There's another step, which is grid connection. When you create grid connection, you can actually make your job easier, because within 3 or 4 months duration you may come into a certain position. From the basin transformer center, if you want to create a connection to basin or catchment areas, to be honest, actually it requires longer time than you can think of it, and it may create certain slowing down effects for your project. After you have collected all requirements, all permits, you have completed all the stuff and grid connection process, you started to work with Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources. You have to get their approval, but there is something here. As you all know, in the report, Ministry of Energy should give the approval for your license to be valid. As you all know, that in February or January the reporting is available. If you get your report in September or October, you can deem yourself as lucky, because if you want to get your license between this period, actually it will create some delays for almost 12 months. So you have to work in advance for your job to be completed in time. And there are certain conditions about finance. When we evaluate all these conditions, we are very lucky that we have finalized non-recourse project financing. We have eliminated all the risk regarding project financing, and we believe that it is going to be more common in the near future. There is another point in project finance. Your sponsor or the other party should take certain tariffs into consideration. As you all know, this tariffs is about 4 cents, and if we make some calculations, they can be reduced to 3.7 euros. Yesterday, our minister made an announcement with regards to local content recognition. And as you all know, with regards to imbalanced market risk, you have to be subjected to renewable energy sources mechanism, or you have to be registered in free market evaluations. But as you all know, there are certain uncertainties, and these uncertainties create some economical losses. In the previous meetings, a person working in the plant mentioned something. If you make 2% of failure, it can create loss, 15% of loss in the income or revenue, and it can totally affect your whole study. All of this states should be completed within 22 months. When we calculate, make a rough calculation, as you can see here, it can take 3 years. To be honest, it has taken your 3 years at least. Construction period can change depending on your capacity of your facility. It can change from 22 to 46 months. But at last, you need to start your commercial operation. After you have finalized your commercial operations, it seems that everything has been figured out. One of the most important points in this regard is with regard to future, there are certain objectives, and while you are catching up with objectives, there are certain challenges, and this challenge should be evaluated in a common sense. But especially the most important thing, this is my personal opinion, right now the current license progress should be monitored very closely, and if they are deemed as failures, next application round should be determined. We do have 19,000 installed capacity, and we have the potential, or we have the 7,000 to be installed in order to catch up with our objectives. Next application date is also important for progress monitoring. As I have witnessed previously in the meeting and in this conference, I saw this. There are certain roadmaps. We have seen this. As I said before, we have to think from this perspective. Current licenses or current projects, generally they take wind features and perspectives into consideration. And when you think all features of wind into consideration, you have to be dealing with more complex projects, and it means that the time that you are going to spend for each project will be longer than the previous one. But of course, there is good news for us with regards to MRAM and electricity market regulations. There is a new regulation and amendments for unlicensed and licensed generation. There is going to be an amendment, but this is now on the draft stage. Actually, this new market law will open new horizons to the sector, because when you get this electricity license, it will create new horizons. Let's say that you have 70 kilowatt generation. I think these steps will increase your capacity within the near future. With the new regulation and legislation, these economical contributions will be higher in certain lists with a more accurate feasibility conditions. Here, of course, one of the most other crucial points, we are all in the same ship, and we are international players. We believe in this market a lot. As our previous speakers have mentioned, we have a common faith and hope in this market. We have to catch these objectives. This is the thing that we have to know. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have some time for a few questions. So there are some wandering microphones in the back. Please, when formulating your questions, you can do so in English or in Turkish. This is no problem. Do introduce yourselves and let us know who your question is being addressed to. All right, we seem to have a shy audience. Okay, I will get the round of questions started. I just wanted to follow up on this issue of the local content requirements with you, Hiki, and with you as well. You mentioned that if the market was designed properly, and if the market was going in the right direction, and you had enough perspective for manufacturers, having a local content requirement was not necessary, because the investments were going to be made on the basis of the market. Do you think that earlier decisions in terms of local content requirement made in Spain a few years back can be considered as responsible for the overcapacity that we have in the Spanish markets now?
Yes, definitely there was at some point in Spain we have let's say a federal government, so we have regional governments that decided that they wanted to have industrial wind power industrial capacity in the regions. So in order to be able to sell the wind turbines or the components, especially the wind turbines, in the region, when they had very ambitious objectives in these regions, they had to establish some type or some amount of manufacturing capacity, and this was quite bad, because at some point some companies had more than 10 manufacturing places when actually there was scope for maybe 3 or 4. And this is because of otherwise not being able to participate in the tenders of the regional governments. And this was a particularly bad idea, because it increases the cost for manufacturers and increases the cost for developers. So it's better to have the right size and let the market decide and the investors decide naturally where to invest in capacity, because otherwise you might then end up with the problems afterwards on what to do with overcapacity.
Perhaps a question to you, Lars. I mean, you highlighted a host of different political challenges, and I couldn't help to be amused at the beginning of the presentation, seeing that picture of Chancellor Merkel. And apparently you're taking good care of your political connections in Germany. And I'm wondering, in terms of policies, what you see as the primary challenge for the Turkish government if they are to reach their 2023 objectives.
Well, what are the main challenges? I believe I would tend to agree with Heikki from before that manufacturing, or the location of manufacturing, should be determined by the market rather than by political initiatives. I believe that that's the best approach going forward. If the volume is here, we will be there also. There's no doubt about that. But to drive manufacturers to establish production through political systems, I'm not sure that that's going to work well. So what do I consider the main challenge for Turkey? I am really quite concerned about the very practical issue of financing. I'm sure I can find 2 or 3 other things that I consider significant challenges, but I really do believe that financing is going to be a major issue for the industry. I mentioned in my speech that banks are becoming much more hesitant when it comes to making or committing money to projects generally, and to renewable energy projects also, in particularly to some extent driven, at least in the part of the world where I have my daily life, by issues in the solar sector, but nevertheless affecting the whole industry. And I believe that that's going to be a major challenge going forward, because, as it was also said in the presentation before, if we do not have the money to fund the growth, then it will not happen. Then it's all going to be theory.
A question to you, Gurkan, now. You highlighted a very long and complex process, and procedure in terms of developing your projects, getting all the licenses and permitting procedure, etc. If you were to change one thing in the legislation, or one thing in the approach by the Turkish authorities, perhaps be it the institution of a one-stop shop, what would it be?
Actually, this is a very, very good question. Thank you. I think the most efficient way would be to determine the regions where you would like to have your applications for, because by that way that you can manage and you can have the coordination within the governmental bodies, having their internal processes, avoiding any kind of environmental, mining related, radar related, communication related, or zoning related issues to be solved by them internally, so that the developers are going to be having a project to develop rather than trying to define a project to develop. So I think the most efficient way could be defining the zones or the regions where you think that the projects can be developed. But at that point, I think the important point is also to have the wind measurement data reliable and the wind data measurement for long term. So it doesn't look like to be this happening in a kind of a quite, let's say, short-term period, but in the long term, I think this can be one of these solutions that we can offer.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to give the audience a last chance for a question before we close the session. All right. So on that note, I'm going to, first of all, thanks once again, there are three distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for your contribution. And before I close the session, I just want to take this chance. We've spoken at length over these 2 days about a potential a main event here in Istanbul. I just want to take this chance also to plug our other event, main event, which will take place next year in 2013 in Vienna in February. I mention this because this will be focused on emerging markets specifically, and there's obviously a lot to be said for the Turkish market. So if you're interested in having some visibility at that event, taking part in the discussion, please do get in touch with us, with the Turkish Association, and we'll make sure that you get the most out of your experience and the most visibility possible. And thanks again for your participation, for being here, and I wish you a good afternoon.